Hello and welcome to episode 116 of the Noizze podcast as part of the Noizze Podcast Network and sponsored by Stereo Brain Records. Today, me and Pew record and talk about the new Slipknot album that is due at the end of this week, The End So Far. We discuss the band and the album itself. Well worth a listen, especially in the circumstances surrounding the record as well. Please follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast, at Noizze UK. Follow us on YouTube, give us a comment, a like, tell a friend. Please review us on Spotify, all that good stuff. It makes such a massive difference to us. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much and enjoy the show.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 116 of the Noizze Podcast, part of the Noizze Podcast Network and sponsored by Stereo Brain Records. I am your host / your boy, Chris Pugh, and I am joined, as ever, by my very good friend and Mr. Cynical himself, Samuel Lewis. Just feel like a while since we did one, Sam, but how are we?
We're well. Has it been a month since we reviewed Parkway?
2 or 3 weeks since we reviewed Parkway, so it does feel weird. But this Slipknot album comes out, then we've got Lamb of God within another week. So it feels like it's been a month, but we're getting straight back on the bandwagon anyway. So this Slipknot review happens, and then within a week we're sitting back in this chair talking about Lamb of God. So the albums start coming and they don't stop coming.
Smash Mouth reference for those taking notes at home.
Obviously, Slipknot and Smash Mouth fans coalesce. I'm certain that they certainly end up in the same Venn diagram.
Oh yeah, there's one guy that's buzzing right now.
He's like, yeah, that's a great reference. We are a rock and metal podcast available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, basically wherever you get your podcast. Me and Sam will be there. The best way to support us is to like, subscribe, or follow, depending on whichever service you are using. Also, tell a friend about us. That is a great way of spreading the word for us as well. Follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast, and you can follow the main Noizze Twitter handle at Noizze UK. As you can see from the title of this episode, today we are discussing the brand new Slipknot record, The End So Far. Sam, I don't see any reason why we should pause. I think we should get straight into this review.
Let's do it.
Let's go. Okay, so The End So Far is Slipknot's 7th studio record. It's out on September 30th via Roadrunner Records. It's said to be their last release on the label. I don't think it's necessary for us to do the usual big contextual discussion background that we usually do for album reviews, Sam, when it comes to Slipknot. We don't need to talk about Slipknot context, really. I'm fairly certain anyone that's watching this review has a fairly good idea of the background of Slipknot and what they have meant to heavy metal in the 21st century. But I think what we could do, Sam, and something you alluded to before we started recording, is just speak about the importance and gravitas of this being Slipknot's last release on Roadrunner, because they have been symbiotic, haven't they, since 1990. They were signed in 1999, I believe. Or possibly the end of 98.
Because I think regardless, Make Kill Repeat wasn't on Roadrunner.
Yeah,
I think
it's referred to as like a demo album now, Make Feed Kill Repeat. So yeah, let's talk about that. Roadrunner and Slipknot have been symbiotic in terms of their workings and in terms of what Slipknot have achieved across the metal and the rock spectrum over the last 22 years. So I don't want to talk about the verbiage around Slipknot's original kind of teasing of this album with the montage of historical moments in Slipknot and then calling the album The End So Far. I think there was somewhat of a purposeful red herring there. But let's talk about the fact of final Slipknot release on Roadrunner. It's important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think when you discuss when we get into like some of the interviews that the band have given already about the album and stuff that you sent me, that Revolver Mag piece with Jim Root and stuff, it's definitely played into the production of the album and their approach to the album. It's human nature here. If you're about to quit a job in the last 3 months, you kind of stop staying late and you kind of stop doing the extra little bits and things like that. And without going too far into the actual review itself, I do think it's significant, but I do think it also contextualizes what does feel the final interactions between a band and label that have decided that their relationship is no longer functional.
I'd be curious. I think the best way for us to determine the process around the recording of the end so far is to be in about 8 to 16 months' time when the band start talking about the album retroactively.
Yeah,
Because
I actually wrote this in my notes as well.
yeah, I would be very curious to know the process of writing, recording, and curation of this album with Roadrunner and their representatives, because something tells me that that's been something of a strange process. And a strange and strained process when you actually listen to the album and when you listen and read an interview that Jim Root gave to Revolver Mag, which I am going to talk about with you in a moment. So it is symbiotic, their relationship. It is strange to see ending. By the sense of this, it's the right time to end it if this is where things were currently going. And I think, Sam, the best thing for us to do before we start talking about the record, I mentioned this to you in passing when we were here at Machine Head a couple of weeks ago. Has it been 18 years, Sam, since Slipknot released a great album? If we think about Volume 3 came out in 2004. Okay, there's only been 3 albums since in that 18-year period. So it's hardly like Slipknot have been just on a revolving kind of conveyor belt of releasing records every couple of years. So there's only been 3 since. So it's not like I'm saying that Slipknot have become the worst band in metal. But has it been 18 years, Sam, since Slipknot released a great album?
Great, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I thought All Hope Is Gone was good.
Yeah, I like All Hope Is Gone. It's not great, but I like it. It's good.
Yeah, there were like 3 really good tunes on there, I think. Geometry the Killing Name is good. Dead Memories is good. Psychosocial is good. Snuff is weird. And the rest of it's sort of quite passable. But Volume 3 is a great album. And as we'll get into the album, their last 3 records at times have felt like the ceiling of those records has been, this could be an album track on Volume 3. That's the way that I feel about listening to their material at the moment. And it's hard. It's hard to say this about a band like Slipknot that are so well loved and admired and respected and all the sort of rest of it. But it's true. They've released 3 great albums that came one after the other.
Well, I don't think Slipknot have ever released a bad album until perhaps one we're about to discuss. But I don't think Slipknot have ever released a bad album. I really liked We Are Not Your Kind. I liked The Grey Chapter. I liked All Hope Is Gone. So I don't feel like Slipknot ever released a bad album. But as you mentioned, that triumvirate of self-titled Iowa Volume 3 is pretty much post late 80s, mid 90s. That's as good as it gets really for metal over the last 27 years for me. That triumvirate in terms of metal moving into the mainstream and metal moving into a metal band moving into superstar status. I think that's absolutely as good as it's gotten for us in terms of superstar status metal band. I was curious about what our Twitter followers thought of this. So I put up a poll for people to vote on when they thought Slipknot's last great record is, and this is in no way symbolic of what everyone or the general Slipknot audience thinks, but it is a nice little snapshot. Volume 3 got 38% as the winner, as the last great Slipknot album. Interestingly, We Are Not Your Kind was second with 30%. So We Are Not Your Kind was actually only was like 8% behind Volume 3. All Hope Is Gone came in third at 21%, and Grey Chapter came in fourth at 11%. And then we started to get some really quite interesting takes on when Slipknot's last great record was. I'm just going to read a few of these out, Sam, because I think some of these are really apt, and I'd like to discuss a couple of them. Tim the Enchanter, also known as Timberlake, our good friend, he mentioned that all those albums have decent moments, but Volume 3 was the last time I think Slipknot gave us a perfect record. I'm not sure I'd go for perfect on Volume 3, but I'd certainly believe it's a great record. Mosh Junk said that Volume 3 was essentially perfect, but We Are Not Your Kind showed a group that had put together some incredible music despite navigating some pretty new circumstances for them. Red Flag was also the heaviest thing they'd written in a long time too. In a lot of ways, I agree with that, by the way. Red Flag goes absolutely hard. A really interesting take here. by the Bollinger Escape Plan. They've lost their edge, unfortunately. The first and best album was genuinely unsettling, but as the music has become poppier, it's made their whole aesthetic seem like a cheap gimmick. I think they're a good entry-level band, but that's the only purpose they serve these days. Perhaps quite hyperbolic or harsh there, but a good entry-level band, Sam, is that what Slipknot have become? Are we talking about Slipknot in the same way we would refer to Five Finger Death Punch?
No,
Entry level?
No, because Slipknot were good for 5 years, and Five Finger Death Punch haven't been good for 5 minutes.
No, I mean, I don't mean in terms of quality. I mean in terms of if you were just getting someone into metal, you would start them on, and then they would spread their wings from there and get into more obtuse, more or heavier stuff.
Perhaps, but I think Slipknot have been part of the entry-level group of metal for a long time, regardless of what their modern career holds. Anyway, most people in the last 15 years, I would say, Duality is one of the first heavy metal, real modern metal songs that they would have liked, and it feels like the next natural progression after kids that used to get into like Linkin Park and stuff in the early 2000s. It doesn't feel too far away. I think it's possible that Slipknot have become a legacy band. Let alone
they are in their 50s.
yeah. I think it's fair to say that if you buy a Slipknot ticket now, you're not necessarily looking to listen to the new music. And I feel that Slipknot probably curate set lists where 16 songs are from 1999 to 2005-ish. And then there are half a dozen from 2008 onwards. I think that's the point that we've got to now. Without getting into the actual review itself, just a couple of things that I wrote at the conclusion of it. I put that Slipknot are perhaps now a well-funded but mediocre aging band that is clinging to moments to remind us of 1999, 2004. It's easy to forget that with 18 years, masks and inflammatory interviews that could perhaps cover up a little bit of the aging process and more of the obvious changes of members, that maybe it's over. The Slipknot is a truly impactful band. They're no longer appointment listening. They get one post Roadrunner record to see if this is an anomaly for me. That's what I put at the conclusion of reviewing this record.
I think that's kind of apt, and I actually do agree. Pretty much, we are perfectly in line with how I feel about this album.
I think the gimmicks and the fancy dress is covered up, because I know it sounds really strange, but I think psychologically we don't see them age. We don't see them struggle. They're always behind masks. We don't see their members change, and we don't see their dynamic shift. That's like it's behind the curtain, quite literally. Whereas bands of their era, like no one's talking about like, will Korn release another great album? We're not in that mode. We were talking earlier about how rare it is that Machine Head have produced a really good album, when in reality, by most metrics, that time has passed. And I think if you take Paul Gray and Joey Jordison out of the band, and you change the relationship with the label, and you do all the sort of things that Jim Root referred to in the interview, where it was rushed, to say the least, in terms of the pre-production and the actual writing of the record, then this is the production that you get. This is the album that you come back with. This is the inevitable process that happens. No, time isn't defeated.
Well, you mentioned there in the interview that Jim Root has done. Slipknot fans listening to this have probably already seen or heard this, but let's just go into it, because I think it's fascinating for this to come out. For this to come out, this came out last night. This did. This came out like I saw this last night, and I immediately messaged you. I was like, the end so far comes out in 4 days, and Jim Root has done this interview where he's like, I don't know about this album. Like, it was crazy. I genuinely can't
softening the criticism. That's what that feels like.
I genuinely can't remember this ever happening before. I mean, it probably has happened before, but I can't remember a band at the scale of Slipknot releasing a new album the last on the literally on the label that they have literally carved their history into metal with. I can't remember this ever happening where a band members come out before the album's released and said, "Yeah, not big on this one myself." I'll just go for this. This is an interview you can all read on revolvermag.com. And speaking recently with Music Radar, guitarist Jim Root revealed that misgivings about both the recording process and the final product, sentiment that he said Slipknot percussionist slash conceptualist Sean Crayon shares, at least to some extent. Quote, this is direct from Jim Root. I felt that we weren't prepared for Joe Barresi. Joe Barresi is the producer, also known for producing with Tool, Queens of the Stone Age, and the Melvins. And I feel like we were not able to use Joe to his full extent. You know what I mean? Root told Root Music Radar. We did not do pre-production. We essentially built this record in the studio, and a lot of that was due to COVID and us being separated. And the circumstances led us to do the record the way it was done. This is where I think it gets really interesting now. With my mindset being the way it was, I didn't have a ton of creative input. I felt kind of rushed trying to come up with ideas for this or that arrangement. We weren't rehearsed as a band. We did not come in knowing the songs top to bottom, and that affected the record. That put us behind schedule. It had us not really arguing and fighting with each other, but trying to figure it out, like, what is the best way to approach this, knowing that we are doing what we are doing. You can make a plan and you can plan as much as you want, but the big clock above your head and the budget from the label and all this stuff, the studio we were at and the scheduling of that, there are so many factors that were against us making this album that I'm surprised we were able to finish it. I mean, I can't believe this. I'll read this one last paragraph. And then it's taken us so long to get it out to compare to how long it took us to track it. It's like, well, if this has taken this long to get it out, then we could have taken our time with pre-production and, in my mind, put out a better product. And that's not to say we're disappointed with what we're putting out. It's where we are at. It's what we were able to do given the circumstances and the things we had to work with. I've got to say, Sam, quite a damning lament on the end so far's creation, curation, production, existence.
Yeah, there's also a quote near the bottom of that where it says, Sean Crayon will say things like, this isn't a Slipknot record, but it is because our name's on it. That's how people will see it. So they're already planting the seeds of the fucking main songwriter in Slipknot saying, well, it wasn't really a Slipknot record because of these 10 excuses that we've already got out of there. That is insane. I also appreciate his point about, well, if it's taken this long to put out, why couldn't we have more time in the studio? And B, big B, why don't they just have as much time as they want in the studio? They're fucking Slipknot. Why don't you just turn around to Slipknot and say, oh, you haven't got enough time to rehearse as a band and the songwriting isn't great? No worries, lads. You Slipknot. Take 3 months. Get back together. Work on the band, rehearse. COVID has hit us, take some extra time. Roadrunner have got we must have this album out by the end of 2022. That's the way that it is. You've got to get in the studio. You've got to get this done. Go, 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 go. And what has come out of it, when you listen to the record, it sounds like that. It sounds like, I was saying to you before over the weekend, when we had a brief conversation, because we're always very careful at tiptoeing around having a real conversation ahead of a podcast so the podcast feels fresh, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do when it's all when it's the one many things we like to talk to each other about. But it feels like I said that someone who isn't Slipknot but is imitating Slipknot is writing an album that they think Slipknot would write. It's like me trying to imitate Charles Dickens' writing in a lesson for my English students and just being like, well, here's a bit of humor and loads of description. That's Dickens, right? It's like the band are like, all right, okay, we've got a list of the things that go on a Slipknot record, so let's just get those in. We've got some marching band stuff. It's in drop C. Have you got some angry lyrics? Cool, we've got some angry lyrics. We got a bit of choruses here. We've got some laughter. I've got some interesting synth sounds in the background. It just feels like it's like Slipknot bingo, Slipknot painting by numbers. And it's just like, hey, if we just do all this, it'll sound like a Slipknot record, right? And then there's no real care and attention placed on the individual songs and some of the songwriting decisions. It just feels like the first decision is the decision that the song has gone with. Like when they're writing tunes together, there's usually a real meticulous, not just Slipknot, just in bands in general. There's a real meticulous approach. Like you've interviewed bands as much more than I have, and I've interviewed a fair few myself. The amount that the good bands say that it takes them to write songs, and that discussion and piecing things together in that thread that takes place on really expansive material, because I know how important it is usually quite astonishing to listen to. The way that bands are able to really be microscopic. This doesn't feel like that at all. This feels like a last minute presentation type approach from a band that has like checked out from this process, and they just appear to be throwing things at a wall, and the first thing that sounds like a Slipknot song will go on the record.
I agree. I usually there's some kind of back and forth between us. So we agree, but like perhaps to a different extent. But dude, I really, really agree with pretty much every single thing that you've said there, which also sometimes kind of makes the podcast kind of boring. But I can't help but just agree that's just where I am. Let's just talk about. I'm not going to talk about the singles because if you're a Slipknot fan, you've heard the singles. One just quick mention though. If you weren't a massive fan of We Are Not Your Kind, Unsighted was a banger. If you weren't a massive fan of The Grey Chapter, The Devil in I was a banger, right? AOV was a banger. That Custer was a banger, right? Mm. I listened to the singles on this album, mate, and I was immediately concerned. I was like, this is a problem potentially. Because, the first thing I believe was the Chapeltown Rag, which is fine. It's good. It's heavy. It's nasty in areas. Nothing great to it though. I believe the next song was the Dying Song. It's all right in it. It's fine, not too bad, and nothing to write home about. Yen, I didn't. I don't like. I don't like Yen at all. So I was coming into this. I was like, man, yeah. Yen's a single. Yen is. I came into this album. I was like, man, I really hope they're saving this latter half for something special. And Sam, they haven't saved anything special. Let's just talk about it, mate. With the exception of interlude opening tracks, Adderall is the worst opening track to a Slipknot album I've ever heard.
It's terrible. My only hope that it is considered an interlude track by the band, and it isn't something that they're ever going to perform live at the opening of a gig, because that would be a terrible idea. They've done stuff where it's like weird opening interlude tracks, like the opening of All Hope Is Gone with like the screaming and the ranting, where it kind of feels like a song for about 30 seconds. And then obviously with the earlier tracks, like 515 and the track that preludes Sick, which is just a series of numbers, they deliberately sort of like tracks that lead to riffs and things like that. But beyond that, this is just, you're right, it's monotonous and slow, and
it's lifeless. There's nothing to this.
Yeah, and it repeats, and this is the thing that they do a lot on this record. It repeats a chorus despite the fact that the chorus is not at all good, and they don't modify the chorus at any point in the song at all. Because the first time I heard the chorus, I was like, okay, they introduced like this backing vocal stuff, and then maybe next time they'll add a bit of weight to it, and it grows and grows, and that's like how the song sort of builds. But it doesn't. It just keeps going, rotating between one limp section to another. And really sets the tone, like most interlude tracks, most overtures, sets the tone for the rest of this record. I'm just gonna come out and say it, Kris. This is a bad record. This is a bad Slipknot album. This is the worst Slipknot album they've ever written.
Yeah, this is the worst Slipknot album they've ever written. And I say that as someone, Slipknot are one of my 10 favorite bands. I adore Slipknot. Slipknot, yes. Everything that I love. Slipknot, everything I love about metal. And that's including The Grey Chapter and We Are Not Your Kind and All Hope Is Gone, because I like all of those albums. Like, I love Slipknot. They are absolutely my top 10 favorite bands. I adore them. Seen them like 3 or 4 times. Amazing. We'll probably still see them on every tour they do, because I love Slipknot. This album's bad. This isn't a good album. It's not a good album. This. It's not. Let's move. Adderall is just this Corey's crawling vocal style is kind of bland, and there's just very little in that track that draws me in. Less than ideal start to the album. And like I say, with the exception of interlude tracks, it's by far the worst opening song to a Slipknot album. By literally a country mile. Let's skip through to Hive Mind. Hive Mind for me is the atypical example of the crux of this album, because Jay Weinberg will deliver this really solid drum fill performance. Jim and Mick will prop up the rhythm with rough and tumble and some intricate riffs. Corey will drop in with some really nice scathing vocals. But when it comes time for the ideas to coalesce in the chorus, things just fall like absurdly flat.
Yes.
And like this
Doesn't go
track,
anywhere.
this track really deserves a better chorus, because there are really decent moments on Hive Mind. And what I do want to say is the best 30 seconds of the end so far is the closing breakdown of Hive Mind that leads into the opening slide riff of Warranty, the following song. That's the best 30 seconds on the album, and that's the Slipknot that I want. But Sam, I've got to look at a microcosm of the album there for 30 seconds to tell you something that I really enjoyed. There really isn't much else on this album that I listened to and found any kind of real enjoyment out of. And I'm not sure that's coming from a perspective of me just being a jaded old time Slipknot fan. I think that's coming from a perspective of me just being a metal fan. And I'm listening to this album, it's just doing nothing for me. And I adore Slipknot, and it's like I'm like gutted about it because I love them. This album, man.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. The riff in the final 30 seconds of this is great. It's the first moment that feels like a hint of the Slipknot gore. That's just used to pulse through their albums, and now it just feels like a fleeting memory. Like when you used to watch like R9 do a step over, and it's like, oh, he's back, or like you'd see Totti get free kick before wheezing around Roma's Stadium for 75 minutes. And like, oh yeah, but he's 39. And it's kind of like that. It's like there's like a little flashing moments, like a little tug at what they used to be, and that it just sort of goes away. Because the opening of Warranty made me a little bit optimistic because it felt a bit more metal in that moment. Nice pause for the percussion hitting for the verse, but again, where's the choruses? There aren't any. I thought they would at least attempt at some ambition in the middle of Warranty, with like this middle section with like a big chorus going on behind, like a group vocal, and then when they realised they didn't know how to conclude the song, we went back to military drums while Corey was giggling to a microphone. It's like, cool, we've been there before, and it's back to Slipknot by numbers. I was really hopeful in the opening of Medicine for the Dead, because I thought that
as was I.
The synth opening, I thought that riff is really nice. It's like immediately compelling, immediately catching, just proper simple riff that could be the basis of a really good tune. And then there's like a nice heavy groove at the start, nice palm muted transition. I felt hopeful at the outset. I like a lot of what's going on here. I didn't mind the chorus. Like it's that descending kind of and I was like, okay, that's fine, but we need to have something else going on the next time you play this chorus. So I like the cymbals and the stuff in the verses, and then the chorus come back again, which is identical. I'm like, all right, please, maybe there's a third chorus when they change it up a little bit. They don't. They repeat the chorus, I want to say 4 times. They do 4 bars worth of the chorus at the conclusion, where it just keeps going back again, like on a loop. And there's nothing that changes. There's no tempo change. There's no key change. There's no riff modification. When you write a song, I can't believe I'm even saying this. Like I'm trying to mansplain to someone how to write a song, but like with no songwriting experience that even remotely matters. But when you're playing a chorus like 4 times that repetitively, most songs change an element of that chorus to keep the listener interested, whether that's even slight changes, whether like they pause one of the instruments for the vocal to start the chorus and then the instruments come in later, or they change a riff behind the chorus so it just feels different, or the drummer changes the drum beat so it goes from half time to sort of full time to just sort of reach this crescendo. Something happens in a repeated chorus to change that, and that happens in lots of very good choruses to keep things interesting. This is like a ringtone. It just loops over and over and over again, and I lose interest. I'm like, do something else, because the chorus is okay, just do something else. And then I listened to Acidic, which I was like, please be called this, because it's a really heavy song and it's going to be sharp, and it's kind of black metal-y and grandiose for about 15 seconds. I'm like, okay, and then immediately it's like here's the verse, and it just loses all of the intensity.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because my kind of notice for Acidic was that Corey shows off his vocal range, which has never stopped impressing me. And regardless of the moments where Corey isn't interesting me on this album, his range is always like something impressive. But I literally wrote for the notes here, similarly to what precedes and what follows this song. Where does it all go? Like the album just is so often just deflating. Like there'll be these moments of like you really trying to find interest. You're like, right, okay, interested in doing something a little bit different, a little bit like on Medicine for the Dead, and multi instrumentalism. Yeah, okay, multi percussionism. Yeah, great, sounds good. Where are we going to go with this? And then it'll just be something that's completely middle of the road and flat, and it just takes it is honestly, it's like this album just throws like stumbling blocks at your enjoyment just to see how many you can jump over and still stick around for the ride. And Heirloom, oh mate, Heirloom, apart from the opening drum fill from Jay Weinberg, literally what else is there to say about Heirloom?
It's a Stone Sour song.
Honestly, I used to hate that. I used to hate that.
He doesn't even scream.
Slipknot just Stone Sour with masks. I used to hate that. I used to hate when people are Slipknot are just down there with masks now. I used to really, really grind my gears. I used to think that was such a limp, weak criticism. But honestly, mate, Heirloom's rough, man. Like Heirloom is a difficult listen. I was listening to Heirloom and was like, man, what's happening here, man? This isn't good.
Time filler. It's that's one of the worst songs on the record. It's so obvious a throwaway song. So obviously a throwaway song that it's
man,
like
they wrote that in 18 hours. They wrote that in 18 hours, man. I'm certain.
Probably recorded it and fucking tracked it as well in that amount of time by the sounds of things. And like you get to H37, bit of a group vocal, and the Corey's rapping again, which again feels like have we tried rapping for a bit? No, we haven't done that for a bit. We just give that a go.
I think it's the best out and track on the album now, H377.
Yeah, it's cool. It just feels like they said to each other, should we try a heavy one? Like when you take a picture at a beach and someone suggests, should we do a silly one? And everyone just gives it a go for a bit. It maybe it's in the context of the album that it's particularly disappointing. It just feels like a just stab in the dark. And I was hoping that it was just better. Man, it's not good, dude.
It's not good. It's some of the moments on these songs are just really problematic.
Did you ever watch Happy Gilmore, where he's like, "There's one problem, Happy. You're just not any good." Like that's what this feels like. There's one problem, Slipknot. You're just not any good. Like this isn't good.
Dessard gives me physical pain. I don't like Dessard at all. And again, this is going to it gives me physical pain because I love them. It gives me physical pain because I love the band, and I just want so much more for them. And then when we come to the end of the record, mate, I remember when I first saw the track listing for this album, and I saw it's called The End So Far. At that point, it wasn't particularly clear what that was signifying. Obviously, now we know it's just signifying the end of their relationship with Roadrunner. But I thought, final song, finale. Wow. This could be like this really grandiose, huge send-off for Slipknot. And even when I found out that the album wasn't the end of Slipknot, it was just the end of their relationship with Roadrunner, I was still thinking, wow. The label the major label that took a chance on them, the major label that they've, as I mentioned earlier, carved into the history of heavy metal with. Here we go. Final songs are called Finale. Shoulder shrug. Nothing much going on. Just bland, kind of dull. Just disappointing, Sam.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great at all. It's really sad, actually. There's like occasional moments with the nice strings, nice little neat melody at the opening song by Taylor, and then once again I'm like, he's not going to repeat the same lyric for 4 minutes, is he? They're not going to do the same thing every chorus, are they? And then they do exactly that. There's no ingenuity, there's no intensity, there's no arc, there's no effort. where it doesn't appear that they've tried. If you take out the money in the budget, that's what's trussing this up. This is like a Lamborghini without an engine. It's well made and it's put together nicely and it's well mixed and all the drums sound decent but it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't serve a purpose. It's it's so disappointing. It's so disappointing. Like I said at the top when I said the final bits, I just came away from that thinking it's just well funded bad. It's mediocre. The product is lacking, and they know it clearly. If that's the sentiment of the band, they know it. But even having the having the finale, having the temerity to call a song like that finale, and to put this grandiose feeling around the album and to give it some significance, and then produce this is insulting, frankly. For a band like you say, like Slipknot, that were taking a chance on a bar road run, and yes, in the history of band versus record label, you shouldn't really take record label very often on the side of that, because the history of music suggests that the band are often cheated by the record label, and it's worker versus employer, and depends politically what side you're on, but it's kind of hard to side with the record label so often. However, if you're a record label executive for Roadrunner and you get the bill and then you listen to the record, how are you not really annoyed that you feel a little bit betrayed, a little bit let down? Because this is like paying for a filet mignon steak and the guy comes up with a corned beef sandwich and says, well, it's beef, isn't it? What the fuck's your problem? And it's the same situation here. Well, it looks like Slipknot. It's got Slipknot's name on it. It's got Slipknot's songwriters on it. But I don't know. When I fucking press play, that doesn't sound like Slipknot to me. But it costs the same as Slipknot, and it's just so. Oh man, like it's just off. It's not right. It's just a fitting conclusion. Where really, aside from moments of nostalgia, this feels like a Marvel film doing a Slipknot album, where it's just well made, unstructured bullshit and doesn't do anything for anybody, including, by the sounds of it, the band members themselves. I'm sorry, man. I'm a massive Slipknot fan. I'm a massive metal historian, and this is just really disappointing. And it may be an anomaly when they come out of their post Roadrunner independent. We're gonna do it ourselves thing. We don't need creative input. We're gonna spend 3 years on a record and be really meticulous. So maybe the next Slipknot record in 2025 is incredible.
Yeah.
And they have time and they have songwriters and they can do their own thing and they don't have to answer to anybody. But also, on the flip side of that, when was the last time they had to answer to anybody anyway?
I don't think they've had to answer to anyone since Duality came out as a
Right,
single.
so I'm not really going to sit here and think, oh, somebody's talked them into that. No, they've just stopped putting out material that they really care about, because you can either take one of two stances from this, future Slipknot interviewees. You can sit and be honest and say, look, man, we were rushed. We didn't like the record label anymore. We put out something just to get rid of it. Bands do that a lot when they're being pushed by record labels historically to put out loads of albums. They just put something out to get off the label and move forward. If you tell me that, I'll accept it. And then if the next album's great, we don't worry about it. It's just a footnote on the history of one of the greatest bands of all time. But if you give me any shit about like, oh well, we were pushed by the record label to write some songs that we felt were mediocre and all that stuff, don't give me that horseshit, bro. Don't do that to me. Because we as a collective are smarter than that. As many times as Corey Taylor can be like, what? You didn't think that we were finishing, did you? Despite the fact that everything had the words "the end" written all over it for the first 6 months leading up to this album. And just because we haven't said that it sounds as heavy as Iowa, that means that you shouldn't expect it to be any good. Obviously, we lowered your expectation in the first place, idiot. And it's like, I don't give me that, because you can do that if you keep bringing out really good material. You've lost the right to do that for a little bit, and then when you're on your own, you can figure out a new record. Because fine, maybe they're just this part of their career as well now, where we just look at Slipknot and, like I say, they're a legacy band, and we should do that thing that me and you always argue about, where you say maybe we should just stop expecting good material, and I'm like, oh, you can't do that, and we have this back and forth, but maybe this is where we could stop expecting good material, and it's just a reason for them to see them live and hear, before I forget and stuff. But this, in conclusion, this song, this final song, is a appropriate microcosm on the rest of the record, an appropriate metaphor for where Slipknot appear to be right now, which is a below average, disappointing but well funded metal band. It's Man, it's bad new metal with really good PR. It's Five Finger Death Punch with better PR.
Do you think they're bored? The
Yeah,
same
it
bored to me.
sounds
The same
sound
bored to
bored.
me.
Yeah, it
Same
sounds
bored.
like they don't enjoy what they're doing. It also it's really hard to be as angry as you need to be to produce Slipknot material if your life isn't going that badly.
Yeah,
I always use the Eminem example. As his life got better, his songs got worse.
yeah.
And then when his life went off the rail again, he came out with Relapse, which is like one of his best albums of the last 10 years. Like, but I'm not a rap music fan, but that's like you look at the reviews. By every metric, he was like amazing, amazing, amazing. Millionaire, shit, drug problem, Relapse, incredible album. Then his life's going great again, and guess what? Last two albums are tin. But that's a secondary conversation. Bands as intense and dark as Slipknot tend not to. It's just human nature. How can you write songs of real depth and darkness if if your life's going better? But that being said, they've also gone through tragedy and humongous change and turmoil. So that should be enough for a record as well. I can chase my tail on this forever and ever and ever. But maybe we do just come back to the fact that this is really tough to do consistently. They've given us three of the greatest modern metal albums ever. Probably the greatest 3-album run in metal ever. At least in the last 20 or 30 years. Maybe we should just say thank you and just that's it.
It's interesting for me to kind of decipher where I am with Slipknot because they're one of my favorite bands, because that triumvirate of records means so much to me, because I love them so much. To hear them like this, to hear such mediocrity, really bothers me. And it's not something that I ever truly expected. I honestly thought, before I listened to the singles and the album was announced, I genuinely thought I'd go into an album here and it'd be similar to We Are Not Your Kind. It would have one great unsainted level song. It would have a couple of really heavy songs, some interesting songs, and some songs I'll forget 2 minutes after I've played them. As it turns out, there's nothing here that even comes within touching distance of Unsainted, which was like the headline single from We Are Not Your Kind, and really probably, one of the best Slipknot songs they've released in that decade. Really, really great. We Are Unsainted is. Nothing comes within touching distance of that here. It sounds like a band that are, oh man, I can't remember saying this about Slipknot. It sounds like a band that are creatively spent. It does. It sounds like a band.
This could be their Saint Anger, couldn't it?
Yeah, it sounds like a band that are just creatively spent, and I'm surprised that the album exists 3 years after We Are Not Your Kind, considering I know that there was extenuating factors for the reason why the Grey chapter took so long to come out. But considering that was 6 years, considering We Are Not Your Kind was 5 years after Grey chapter, I'm surprised it was only 3. If there was no pandemic, would this album even exist? Like, something tells you that because there was a pandemic and because there was no touring, etc., because they couldn't do that big cruise they were going to do, that Not Fest, or Not Sea, was it? I think it was called Not Sea or Not Fest at Sea, because they couldn't do the Not Fest around the country that we had tickets, that amazing one. Which I'm still kind of salty about that we did, that we couldn't go.
Slipknot and Sleep Token and Behemoth, wasn't it? If I remember rightly.
And Megadeth.
Oh,
It was a bad boy lineup, and obviously it got cancelled because of COVID. I feel like they felt compelled, or perhaps Roadrunner compelled them to write an album like, right, you're not going to make us tour money for the next year and a half, so sounds like a studio job to me. And because of Zoom, guys, guess what? You could write an album over Zoom now. We don't even need to pay for you to do pre-recording sessions, because you can just write your parts at home and get on a Zoom call and talk about it. Do you know what I mean? And because of that, Would this album even exist if there was never a pandemic? Probably not. I don't feel this album comes out until 2024, 2025 if there was no pandemic. And I feel like it would be wildly different if so. But in the scenario that we're currently in, we're looking at an album that is creatively bankrupt, that's really boring to listen to. And with the exception of a really cool breakdown on Hive Mind, a really cool opening riff on Warranty, some interesting vocal takes from Corey, as always, because Corey's an incredibly talented man. There's just nothing here, man. And imagine saying that about a Slipknot album. I think I'm with you, Sam. What you mentioned or alluded to at the start of the episode. I'm going to consider this a dud. I'm going to write it off. Every band has them. Well, 99% of bands have them. It's a dud. Let's write it off. Let's move on to the next one. If the next one's good, we'll just pretend this never happened. It's the dirt on our shoulder that we flick off and continue walking forward. But I think one of the most telling things is if Slipknot announced their next UK tour, headline the next UK festival, of course I'll want to go. I won't want to hear a single one of these songs live. Now, me and you are sometimes big purveyors of, well, you shouldn't really judge it till you hear it live because the things can be massively different live, and you'll be amazed how much it fits in with the set list, and they can bring the extra dynamics of the live crowd and the lights and explosions, etc. Not with this. There's nothing I want to hear from this album live at all. Let's pretend it's a Green Day situation, and this album just never happened. Get it out. The contract with Roadrunner is fulfilled. They have changed metal forever as a duo, Slipknot and Roadrunner. Let's move on. Let's do something else. Go independent. Go to a different label. Do whatever you want to do. Spend 2 or 3 years on an album. Make it better than this. I hope this isn't. I know it's strange because I've had the thing of like, well, if they're after 50, usually the music stops being good and we should just stop there. I wouldn't want this to be the last album. I don't want this to be the last thing I remember Slipknot for. And I remember, just my closing point here, I remember when it was first announced, called The End So Far, that the promo was the historical montage of Slipknot. I remember my immediate reaction was, I don't think this will be the last thing they ever do, but I'd be happy if it was. Like 23, 24-year history, it's in terms of like Corey being on board and the true essence of Slipknot. 23, 24-year history, they've changed metal forever. They have influenced countless amount of bands that I currently love. They're one of my favorite bands. I'd be happy for them to just say goodbye now. They're in the 50s and leave it and leave it. They can't leave it like this. This can't be the last thing I ever hear from Slipknot. They have to do something else and recover from this. But just a caveat to that point, Sam, this has got good reviews from Metal Hammer and the like. So perhaps we are in the minority. I don't know. Yeah. Something tells me that we're not in the minority. I'd be amazed if the critical reception and the en masse reception in terms of fan base reaction to this album is positive. I just don't see what is positive about it. With the exception of the odd cool breakdown.
The thing is, Sean Crane's not going to come on this podcast and talk to us if we give a nice review, but he might talk to Metal Hammer. We've got nothing to lose.
There is that.
Corey Taylor's not going to be like, hey, these guys from Wolverhampton said that it wasn't that good, and he's just going to look at our view count and just not pay attention to us, and that's absolutely absolutely fine. Go and I'll say is if Corey Taylor ever interacts with this podcast, if it gets this far, which will obviously never happen. If I were you, Corey, I'd just count my gold records, laugh my cock off, and watch something else, like whatever.
Yeah.
Your life's amazing. Do what you like. Whatever. If I ever met him in real life, I wouldn't mention this review. I'd tell him how amazing the rest of his material was. Yeah. I'm just going to be honest about it. But my job is to talk about this, and this is bad. And if I was writing a article about this, and I was putting this into words, and I was putting this out there, one of my takeaways for the headline or the closing comments would be: Slipknot have become what they always swore they wouldn't be, and that's dull.
Yeah,
they've lost what's made them Slipknot on this. And they're no longer interesting in this way, as currently constructed, as currently written. And I just hope that changes next time, because I will always be excited at new Slipknot music. I will always be excited at the prospects of new Slipknot music, which means for the next 20 years, I'm going to have to emotionally be prepared to be disappointed at new Slipknot music as well. I just hope that isn't the case.
some Slipknot fans aren't going to be happy about this album, but this review
Until
sorry,
they listen to it.
but we could do nothing but be honest. Slipknot, one of my favorite bands of all time. I adore them. This record's bad. It's not very good at all. That's where we're going to leave off this episode. We are going to be back within the next week or so reviewing the new Lamb of God album. As well as that, I am considering doing a solo review on the new Counterparts record. That is very much dependent on the time I have available, though. I was able to do that on the Stray from the Path album, but that was primarily because I was on my 6 weeks break from work at that point. That is not so much of a guarantee I can do now, but at the very least, we're going to be back in a week's time reviewing the new Lamb of God record. For now, thank you so much for listening, whether or not you hate us. If you're a Slipknot fan, then we do apologise, but trust us, it's not a good album. We're available on YouTube, our podcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Me and Sam will be there. The best way to support us is to like, subscribe, or follow, depending on whichever service you're using. And you can follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast. We're going to be back in the next week or so talking about the new Lamb of God record. Until then, do listen to the end so far. Perhaps we are wrong, although I don't believe so. We love you very much. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week when we chat about Lamb of God. We'll see you later. Bye.